Welcome back to the School of Self-Worth. I am your host, Nicole Song. I am so excited to talk about today's topic. It is massive for Asian American women, and it is about the biggest block, the main block to having an actual seat at the table. We're going to get right into the heart of this. Before we get going, if you're a high performing Asian American woman who is ready to stop over explaining herself and start being the strategic leader that you are, DM me leader on Instagram at Nicole Song. And make sure to subscribe on YouTube and follow wherever you listen to your podcast so that you can get more content like this. Okay, friends, let's dig in. So if you're a high performing Asian American woman and you have risen through the ranks, you're managing teams, you're just doing all the things, you're running the show in many different ways, and yet you still don't feel like you have a seat at the table. Like your voice isn't heard, you're not seen, you're doing so much work for everybody else, and yet this one thing still feels so elusive. This is what we're going to get into today and talking about what is the real block to you having the seat at the table. And I know for so many of you, this is something that's like feels like, whoa, how am I going to really start to figure this one out? And that's what we're going to get into today. And first, we're going to start with the real lie that high achieving women keep believing, particularly those of you listening who are my Asian American women. And this is the lie that just comes back around and around and around. And it's the lie is that working harder is going to get you what you want. Because the truth is, more hours doesn't get you anywhere. So many of my clients come in like they're exhausted, they're burned out because they're working so hard, and yet they're not getting what it is they want. And the truth is that working harder doesn't create executive leaders. And you probably have noticed and experienced this from people around you who get promoted, who advance. That's not what creates leadership, because if it did, you would already have the promotion, or you would already be leading larger initiatives, or you would already be seen as strategic. You would already have the seat at the table. And this is what I want you to start to pay attention to and notice. So this was happening, this happens to so many of my clients where they have a meeting where they're leading. They're already in charge. They're the one presenting, they're delivering. They're prepared. They are over prepared, probably. They have like perfect slides. They've rehearsed it a bunch of times. And then during that meeting, somebody above you, your VP, president, CEO, whoever, asks a question. And in that moment, something happens and maybe your mind goes blank. Or perhaps in this moment, you start to over explain everything that you're talking about. Or perhaps you even hold back a little bit because you're not quite sure what to say. Sometimes what happens is then somebody else says the thing that you're saying, and everyone's like, oh yeah, like they totally agree with what they said. But you're like, hey, hold on, man, I just said that. Or at nighttime, you're replaying this meeting for hours. So if this is happening to you, we're going to talk today about what exactly it is that's happening, because this is actually the reason you're not getting a seat at the table. And it's a good one. Because here's what happens is that there's just tons of leadership advice out there. There's tons of leadership trainings, and they're often getting this wrong. And if you're actually a manager who's saying this to your team, like, let's start to up the game in terms of our feedback, because this kind of feedback, frankly, is not very helpful. And you might have gotten this feedback yourself in your own career. This is the kind of feedback like, you should speak up more. Maybe you already are speaking up. If you're leading the meeting, you're definitely speaking up. So like, how is that even really going to help you? Sometimes they're like, well, you should really be more confident when you're delivering a presentation. And you're like, well, I am pretty confident when I'm delivering a presentation. So the issue for you isn't around being more confident. Or they say, be more decisive, like take action faster. And you're actually struggling to take the action fast because of the thing that we're going to talk about. Or they're going to say, have executive presence. And you're like, okay, like, what does that mean? Speak slower, be louder. Like, what does that actually mean? Because all of these symptoms, these are what I would consider symptoms, not a diagnosis. And they actually are not going to give you the root cause of what's going on. All of this kind of advice is just, to me, generalized. It's not really specific. It's not clear. It's not actually helpful. So, we're going to talk about the real cause and the real things that are going on in this particular situation because I want you all to understand what's going on here. So, what happens in a situation like this? So, you're in a meeting, you're delivering the presentation, you're fully prepared, you have your ideas, you have your recommendations, like you're going for it. But what happens is when your VP asks a question, or someone challenges you in the moment, or someone says something off the cuff, what that does is it creates some pressure. And that pressure is, I don't know, pressure of expectation. It could be a pressure of worrying about what people think, the pressure that you might be getting it wrong. And then what happens is that creates a protective pattern that comes up inside of you. So this is the block, is your protective pattern. And your protective pattern, there's lots of different versions of this. Some people it's second guessing themselves. Some people it is over explaining. Some people, it is backtracking. So when we get into this place where we're in that protective pattern, we all of a sudden stop trusting ourselves because when you're in a protective pattern of second guessing yourself, I mean, you're not trusting yourself. You're not trusting all your years of experience and skill. You are suddenly doubting and questioning if your data is right, or you're doubting and questioning of the recommendation and information that came from your team, like whatever it is, you stop trusting yourself. And in that moment, as soon as you stop trusting yourself, that's when your leadership changes. That's when all of a sudden you're not showing up as a leader. They're not experiencing you or seeing you as somebody who is confident and knows what they're saying or speaking about. So if you're an over explainer, you're giving them so much more information than they need. And you probably notice them, you're losing them as you're speaking. Those of you who backtrack, you can feel yourself giving up like a little tiny part of your soul because you're backtracking on something you actually feel really clear about. When we have these kinds of protective patterns, like our brain has come up with them to help us in times of need. And these probably come back to when you were a kid. So now let's go back to the way that you were raised. You were raised by Asian parents typically who care about the collective, the whole, the bigger picture. And so they want you, don't embarrass the family, right? That's one of the key ones. And they also want to make sure that you're always representing the family well in general. So your protective pattern might be to backtrack or to soften because you don't want to embarrass the family. That could be another version of your protective pattern. So when this is coming up, though, what the real result is in your life is it's having you not show up as the leader that you are, despite your years of experience, despite your skill set. And so this is really important for you to start to understand and to see for yourself. And this protective pattern is costing you. It is costing you in your leadership. It is costing you your seat at the table. It is costing you the potential for you to say, well, maybe I actually need to be in a different environment. Maybe you want to pivot. Maybe you are undervaluing yourself in your market rate because you think this is all you get to have. One of the protective patterns that comes up for Asian women is loyalty. We stay so loyal to companies, even though it might be past time to leave. So these protective patterns, again, they're built in to try to make you feel safe. And there is a cost when that is actually occurring. So when you start to see what that is and you start to recognize that this block is occurring, now is the time for you to start to make a shift. And this is what I teach in my framework around internal authority. Is the thing you want to start to learn to do is to regulate in that moment. So when that pressure comes in, the boss says something, somebody else, doesn't like your recommendation or says your recommendation, and everyone's like confirming that person's idea is so brilliant, and you're like, hey, that was mine. Internal authority is you being able to regulate yourself in that moment, being able to stabilize your emotional stance, to be able to stay grounded. If you get dysregulated, we know because that protective pattern comes up. So internal authority is regulation. And then that next piece is then repositioning yourself. So you regulate your nervous system and then you reposition yourself back into leadership, back into authority, back into what you know, your skill set, your strengths, your experience. And when you reset back into that place and you're in that repositioning, now you can actually respond. You can say what you need to say succinctly with conviction. You can say it from a grounded space. You can pivot when people are changing what they're saying or their ideas. Like in the moment, real leadership is that ability to be responsive in the moment. So when we're truly in an internal authority, you can actually follow these steps and get to a place of being in response versus being in reaction. So now what changes is how you are before you have internal authority and then after you have internal authority. Before, you're replaying every meeting, you're over explaining, you're waiting for certainty, you're working way too many hours, you are seeking validation from bosses in all these external places. Once you have internal authority, after, what is happening is you're thinking clearly, you're influencing decisions, you're trusting your judgment, you hold your ground, and you are now leading strategically. And everyone recognizes that you are leading strategically. That's the game changer. That's how things truly shift. And this is something that so many of my clients have experienced, what it's like for them to actually go from before internal authority to after, where, VPs are asking for their thoughts and their suggestions. They're being asked to lead. This is how one of my clients got her VP position. Like, she got it at the moment she was least expecting it, because all she did was really own her internal authority. And then that's when they said, all right, it's time for you to be elevated to the next level. So for many of you, it's really understanding and owning internal authority. That's what's going to get you that seat. That's when it's going to help you get the recognition that you crave and desire, and for you to really start to settle into this understanding of yourself as a leader in a totally different way. And this is also what lightens the burden of leadership. Sometimes we feel as a leader that we're carrying so many things for everybody. When you have that internal authority, you stop analyzing all of your behavior based on everybody else around you that you're supporting. You really start to own what it is that you need. You start to own your voice and your experience. And it's just such a more powerful place for you to lead from. And the reason that most capable leaders can't change this alone is because we have to understand the things that we know and that we don't know. And some of you know this, you've heard this before. I always think it's so helpful to have this explained more than once. There's always this thing, all the things that we know that we already are good at, that we have the experience in, like all the expertise you have in your particular industry. Like, you probably know all of those things. And then there's also those things that you don't know, and you know that you don't know them. Like, I have those too. Like, I know that I don't know anything about cars. So if I was asked to fix up my car because it had broken down, I definitely cannot do that. I would not even want to go on YouTube to figure it out. Like, that's just something I know that I don't know, and I don't care to know. And you all have those things too. Like, there's just things you don't care to get more information or expertise about. But then there's this whole realm of our lives where we just really don't know that we don't know it. There's an area of our life where it's blind spots. These are places where we really don't even recognize what's happening, and our protective patterns fall into that place. They fall into this place where you actually don't even know this is happening because it happens in an instant. One of my clients was asking me, we were working on it, and she's like, how do I shift it? And I'm like, well, we had some tools that we were working on, and there's consistency of practice. And this is why we can't change this alone, because I don't know about you, but if I want to change something, I really need some accountability for me to reset and change that pattern, to make a shift and to make a difference. And this is why even the best, smartest leaders can't actually really do this by themselves. And it's so essential for us to understand these patterns of second guessing, patterns of self doubt, which are all the ones that are underpinning when we're over explaining ourselves, when we're not feeling confident. Those patterns typically are pretty old. They're ones that we've had ingrained in us. They're habits that we've done for many, many years. And for you, it's start to understand what pattern is showing up the most often. So that's the first piece of it. And then the next piece of it is to start to understand what is triggering it. What is the consistent situation that causes that to come up? And then to understand how it's affecting how those decision makers are seeing you, and what kind of reputation as a leader that you're developing. And then finally, it's understanding what will actually shift it. If you're like, yes, I really want to know. So that's the final piece, is like understanding what will actually shift it and putting that into place. It's the final puzzle piece. It's the most important puzzle piece. It's what I work with my clients on. So if you're right here and you've already seen this pattern, like just even in this conversation around patterns, you're starting to understand and recognize your pattern, and you're like, I am ready to actually shift it. DM me, leader at Nicole Song on Instagram, and let's chat, because I've got details for you. I've got something for you for us to really work through how to recognize it, what's triggering it, how it's affecting how you're showing up as a leader, how it's changing your leadership, and then finally getting to that point where you can actually shift it. Okay. So thank you so much for being part of this conversation. It's such a rich one. It's such an essential one for Asian American women to make these changes. We're such a small percentage of leadership that if you're already a leader, man, I want you to be able to show up in the biggest way possible. So let's make that happen. All right. DM me, leader at Nicole Song on Instagram, and or share a screenshot of this on Instagram. Let people know you're getting these amazing insights, and I will see you next week or next time on the School of Self-Worth.